There are stories the elite never meant for you to hear. This is one of them. In 1894, a woman vanished. No body, no goodbye, just a faint scent of perfume in a locked room in a hotel that should never have existed. Her name was Isabella Fairmont, and her disappearance was no accident. It was an erasure, a calculated extraction from the annals of history, performed by those who write the rules but answer to no one. If you're watching this, you've stepped into territory that rewrites everything you thought you knew about power. Welcome to DeadScroll. Subscribe now, because what you're about to learn is dangerous, and once you hear it, you don't come back the same. In the final week of November 1894, the Belmont Hotel of Greymoor, Massachusetts, an opulent structure known more for its silence than its clientele, became the center of a mystery so consuming it threatened to shatter the illusion of American aristocracy. Isabella Fairmont, once hailed as the queen of East Coast high society, walked into that building under her maiden name, alone. 7 days later, she was gone. No witness saw her leave. No carriage was called, and no record of her departure was ever written. But the questions her disappearance raised were not about where she went. They were about why so many wanted her gone. To understand the weight of her story, you must understand her role in the machine. Isabella wasn't merely a socialite. She was a pressure point, a woman who sat at the crossroads of old European bloodlines, industrial wealth, and secret dealings that predated the formation of the Federal Reserve. She knew where the skeletons were buried because she helped decorate the closets they were hidden in. She played hostess to presidents and priests, whispered with senators under candlelight, and walked the line between society's glittering ballroom and its backdoor chambers, where decisions were made that shaped entire economies. But somewhere between the love affair she was never supposed to have and the threats she whispered to men more powerful than kings, Isabella crossed a line. And when women like Isabella cross a line, they don't get assassinated. They vanish. But pieces of her story remain. Letters, testimonies, accounts buried in sealed archives and psychiatric records mysteriously destroyed in a 1902 fire. This isn't just the tale of a missing woman. It's the tale of why she had to disappear. And if you keep watching, you'll understand the system that made her and the system that erased her. Isabella Fairmont was not born into obscurity. She was engineered into prominence. From a moment of her birth in 1859, her life had been orchestrated like a performance, designed, directed, and executed by families who believed they were above the laws of man, and perhaps even above the laws of God. Her mother, Catherine Aldridge, descended from colonial Puritan stock, Bostonian bloodlines, so old their names appear in private Bibles, not public registries. Her father, Cornelius Aldridge, was a shipping magnate who controlled the northeastern maritime routes from Halifax to Charleston. But wealth was only the surface. What Isabella inherited was far more insidious. She was raised not to be a daughter, but a symbol, a seal, a cipher that bound together competing dynasties through charm, intelligence, and ruthless obedience to legacy. By 16, she spoke fluent French and Latin. By 18, she was being groomed to marry into one of 5 pre-selected families, each with political ambitions and deeply concealed financial interests. And by 20, she had chosen Theodore Fairmont, a man whose steel empire furnished not only railroads, but the weapons being stockpiled for wars no one was yet talking about. Her marriage was not a union. It was a treaty. Rosecliff Manor, their estate in Greymoor, was built atop stone quarried from land once used for occult rituals by colonial settlers. That land had never been neutral. Isabella's ancestors knew it. The architects who built the manor knew it. And somewhere deep down, she must have known it too. But she did what women in her position were expected to do. She played the role. She curated society, charmed governors, and fed newspapers the image of perfection. But underneath the silk and the symphonies, something ancient was watching. And eventually, Isabella began watching back. Her transformation began in whispers, in conversations she was never meant to hear. Accounts from servants, overlooked but omnipresent, spoke of her pacing the house at night, barefoot, touching the stone walls as if listening for something underneath. A low murmur, a rhythm, a secret older than the house itself. And then there were the books, volumes that were locked away in her husband's private library, bearing titles in Greek, Latin, and one language no one could identify. She began asking questions, quiet ones, dangerous ones, and that's when everything started to change. Because when a woman like Isabella stops performing and starts investigating, power responds not with answers, but with erasure. The disappearance of Isabella Fairmont didn't begin the night she walked into the fog. It began the moment she stopped being useful. In the circle she inhabited, men didn't marry for love. They married for leverage, for alliances, for bloodline control. And Isabella had served her purpose. She had opened doors, cemented deals, conceived heirs. She had been the perfect vessel until she stopped parroting the script and started rewriting it. It was the spring of 1892 when the first true fracture appeared. During a routine gala at Rosecliff, attended by senators and foreign dignitaries, Isabella was seen quietly removing herself from the ballroom and slipping into the west wing of the estate. According to a footman named Elias Ward, she was found 3 hours later in a locked study with Jonathan Pembroke, the architect hired to oversee renovations to the manor's lesser-used southern wing. What they were doing was never officially recorded. But afterward, Isabella changed. She began requesting blueprints, asking about hidden passages and rooms not listed in the estate's official plans. She became obsessed with the manor's original architecture, drawn not by modern hands, but by a reclusive mason known only as Alastair Brine, a Scottish immigrant whose work on private estates was known to include labyrinths, concealed chambers, and esoteric constructs. Documents unearthed decades later, long after her disappearance, would show that Isabella had discovered a sealed room beneath the library, a room with no visible entrance, no written record, and walls thicker than the rest of the manor. When asked by the staff about the construction, Theodore Fairmont simply said it was a family archive and dismissed all further questions. But Isabella didn't dismiss it. She began descending into the archives nightly, staying for hours, emerging pale, shaken, and silent. And then, in early 1893, she fell ill. Not with a cold, not with influenza, but with something unnameable. Doctors described it as a persistent neural agitation. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She claimed to hear things through the stone, whispers beneath the floorboards. Her husband brought in psychiatrists from Boston and Philadelphia, each more discreet than the last. Their consensus was damning: hysteria, a term used to silence women who asked questions men couldn't afford to answer. And from that moment on, every move Isabella made was watched. Every letter she wrote was intercepted. Her bedroom was searched under the pretense of protective concern. They weren't treating her. They were containing her, because she had found something. And whatever it was, it scared them. In the upper halls of Rosecliff Manor, a different kind of silence had begun to settle. Not the genteel hush of aristocratic refinement, but a suffocating, strategic quiet, the kind that follows a warning. Isabella Fairmont, once the most adored woman in New England society, had become a liability. And in the world she occupied, liabilities were corrected. By autumn of 1893, Isabella was no longer seen at public functions. No more appearances at the Newport socials. No concerts. No charity boards. Newspapers began to speculate that she had taken ill, perhaps due to overexertion from her famed hosting. But those close to the estate knew better. Isabella had been pulled from public life, not for her protection, but for theirs. Theodore had shifted. He no longer smiled in photographs. His correspondence, once full of business strategy and social politicking, grew terse, defensive, cold, and most telling of all, he increased security at Rosecliff. Not outwardly, of course, but 2 new footmen appeared, imported from Philadelphia, their names unlisted, their history unverifiable. One maid, who served Isabella tea nightly, later recounted that her silverware was counted before and after each meal, that her letters were opened and resealed, that, on more than one occasion, she found Isabella sitting by the window, her hands trembling over a book she refused to let go of, bound in cracked leather, the title obscured by age. What was in that book? No one ever found out. But that winter, something shifted again. Isabella began speaking of escape, not in the dramatic tone of a social exile, but with the methodical, calculated vocabulary of someone studying prison breaks. She whispered names, some real, some forgotten. She wrote lists. She asked questions about telegraph routes, steamship timetables, weather patterns over the North Atlantic. Her staff began to notice that she never left her room without checking the mirror first, not to fix her appearance, but to watch the door behind her. And then, quietly and with perfect control, she began transferring funds, not through her husband, not through family accounts, but through shell companies owned by foreign nationals. 1,000 here, 5,000 there, hidden across a dozen cities. She wasn't running. She was preparing, because whatever she had seen in the sealed room below the manor had convinced her of one thing. They would never let her live to tell the truth. February 6th, 1894. The night the snow fell sideways across the cliffs. The night wind howled like it had teeth. And the night Isabella Fairmont vanished. She had been seen earlier that day, pale but composed, walking through the western gardens in a heavy fur coat, her face half covered, speaking to no one. A chambermaid named Ruth Harrow later claimed Isabella had pressed something cold and metallic into her hand that morning, a silver locket with no photograph inside, only a folded slip of paper that read, "If he asks where I went, tell him it was somewhere he cannot follow." By dusk, the staff noticed her absence. Her tea tray went untouched. Her bedroom fire remained unlit. And by midnight, panic had settled into every crevice of Rosecliff Manor. Theodore Fairmont did not report her missing. Instead, he fired 3 staff members within 24 hours. Ruth was among them. And just like that, silence returned. But the city would not be silenced. News of Isabella's vanishing spread fast. Too fast for Theodore to contain. Within days, reporters swarmed the cliffs outside the manor. Society columns speculated on madness, betrayal, even suicide. But no body was ever found. No footprints in the snow. No carriage tracks. Nothing. Just one lingering truth. She had gone somewhere no one was supposed to return from. Weeks later, a fisherman claimed he saw a woman matching Isabella's description boarding a coal freighter at New Bedford Harbor, headed not for Europe, but east, toward Nova Scotia. When questioned by local authorities, the man recanted, claimed he'd been paid to say it. But by whom? Then, in March, a parcel arrived at the Boston Globe, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a single object, a torn piece of parchment bearing a map of Rosecliff's estate grounds. Only this map showed something else. A tunnel, unmarked on any plans, running from the southern wing of the house to a small stone mausoleum on the edge of the estate. But when the mausoleum was searched, there was nothing inside. No tunnel, no sign of passage. Just one inscription carved into the stone floor, visible only under black powder. She walked into the dark and took her name with her. To this day, no trace of Isabella Fairmont has been recovered, and no explanation has satisfied those who still whisper her story on the cliffs. Spring came late to Greymoor in 1894. The fog clung longer, thicker, refusing to lift from the grounds of Rosecliff Manor. With Isabella gone, the house no longer hummed with life. The grand ballroom, once a symbol of Gilded Age opulence, remained shuttered. Chandeliers gathered dust. Music was forbidden, and the mirrors, all of them, were veiled in black cloth. It wasn't mourning. It was containment. Theodore Fairmont made no public statement about his wife's disappearance. When pressed by the Boston Evening Transcript, he issued only a single-line telegram. "There is no mystery. She left." But Greymoor didn't believe it. The villagers spoke of strange sounds rising from the cliffs at night, moaning winds that carried a woman's voice. Others claimed to see a pale figure walking the edge of the estate just before dawn, barefoot and in white. Not a ghost. Something else. Something in between. And then came the fire. On May 17th, 1894, the western wing of Rosecliff was consumed in flame. No lightning. No storm. Just combustion. Violent, targeted, and eerily efficient. Rooms that had remained untouched since Isabella vanished were reduced to cinders. But not the library. The fire stopped exactly at its door. When authorities arrived, they were forbidden entry. Theodore claimed it was a private family matter. But one constable, who later left the force, swore that inside the scorched wing they found something unnatural, an arrangement of chairs in a perfect circle, each one facing inward, and in the center, burned into the wooden floor, a symbol that no one could translate. He drew it from memory before he died. 3 interlocking serpents forming a triangle, each biting the tail of the next. No one could trace it to any known language or sect. But those who saw it agreed on one thing. It radiated intention. The fire was not an accident. It was a purge, to erase something that had been uncovered. A week later, Theodore left Greymoor. Permanently. He abandoned Rosecliff to caretakers, shuttered his remaining businesses, and vanished from public life. Rumors followed him, to Maine, to Vienna, to Marrakesh. But no confirmation ever surfaced. He, like Isabella, had become myth. And yet, something remained. In the ashes, in the walls, in the tunnels beneath the stone. Because you don't erase a woman like Isabella Fairmont. You awaken her. Nearly a decade passed. And still, Rosecliff Manor stood, untouched by time, but not by fear. No one purchased the estate. No one restored it. Those who entered didn't stay long. Caretakers rotated out every few months, often without explanation. One man reportedly hanged himself in the grand staircase. Another walked 15 miles barefoot to the Greymoor parish, whispering only one phrase over and over. She never left. She only changed. By 1903, urban legends wrapped around Rosecliff like the ivy choking its windows. Children dared one another to touch the rusted gate. Travelers swore the weather vane turned against the wind. But the real unease came from those who studied old records, those who noticed something deeply wrong. Because Rosecliff Manor's original blueprints were missing. Not misfiled, not burned, erased. Even the town records office had no memory of ever possessing them. And yet, as fate would have it, one map survived. A faded oil painting discovered behind the altar of the old Greymoor Chapel, covered in soot and time, but unmistakable in its detail. It depicted Rosecliff in 1879, only different. A spire where none should be. A west-facing wing longer than current photographs showed. And in the background, almost hidden in shadow, a second house. Smaller, colder. No one could identify it. But local folklore gave it a name, the Quiet House. A structure said to mirror Rosecliff, brick for brick, beneath the earth. For years, the legend was dismissed. Just another ghost story. But in the summer of 1904, a surveyor from Boston, Marcus Lorne, arrived to verify property lines for a proposed rail extension. What he uncovered would fracture whatever belief remained in coincidence. His notes, retrieved after he vanished, spoke of an underground structure. Not a cellar, not a wine vault. A second house, buried, complete with doors, staircases, and sealed rooms. Marcus' final entry? There's light coming from inside, but no flame, no electricity, only humming. It's as if the walls themselves remember something. He was never seen again, but his journal, stained with soil and something darker, was mailed to the Greymoor Historical Society 2 weeks later. No return address, only one line written on the envelope. She's waiting. By autumn of 1904, whispers about Rosecliff Manor were no longer relegated to folklore. They had become obsession. Academic journals refused to publish any findings tied to the estate. Theological institutions distanced themselves from the case of Isabella Fairmont. But behind closed doors, scholars, mystics, and former clergy gathered in secret to discuss what had truly occurred beneath the stone house on the cliffs. One name kept surfacing, Dr. Alaric Bellamy, a former Oxford scholar turned occult historian. Dr. Bellamy had spent the last 6 years studying anomalous phenomena across Europe. He claimed Rosecliff wasn't haunted, it was anchored, that the estate acted as a spiritual lodestone, attracting entities not born of death, but of memory twisted by isolation. In his private correspondence, Bellamy wrote, "There is something in the earth beneath Greymoor, something older than the house. The manor did not create the phenomenon. It exposed it, and Isabella Fairmont was the first to hear it whisper back." He arrived in Greymoor on October 2nd, 1904. Locals reported strange behavior immediately. Bellamy never slept in the same room twice. He kept every mirror covered, even his own pocket watch face. And each night, he stood for hours at the edge of the cliffs, whispering in a language no one could identify, though some said it resembled ancient Enochian. 3 nights into his stay, something changed. The fog returned, thick, low, and unnaturally cold. Dogs refused to go near the gates. And then the humming returned, louder, clearer, measured, as though we're drawing something in from beneath. That evening, Bellamy conducted a private séance in the Rosecliff Library. No candles, only salt lines and sigils drawn in ash. At exactly 3:13 a.m., every clock in Greymoor stopped for 47 seconds. During that silence, Bellamy claimed he made contact. He didn't say with who, only that it spoke without sound, and that it knew his name. The next morning, the library door was sealed shut from the inside. When it was finally breached by the groundskeeper, Bellamy was gone. In his place was a single note, pinned to the back of the grandfather clock with a silver needle. I followed her. From that night onward, no one dared enter Rosecliff again. It didn't matter. The house had already begun to open itself. In the weeks that followed Dr. Bellamy's disappearance, something changed in the soil itself. The townspeople of Greymoor noticed it first. Flowers along the cliffside began to wilt in unnatural patterns, spirals, rings, and crosses, all in perfect symmetry. Birds migrating south veered violently off course when flying near Rosecliff's grounds. And on several occasions, the church bell at St. Elric's rang by itself, 3 times. Always 3. The rector resigned, and in his final sermon, trembling and pale, he warned, "It's not just a house. It's a reflection, and it's looking back." Then came the dreams. At first, it was just the children, waking in the night, screaming about the staircase that turns inward and the lady without a face. But soon, adults reported the same images. Visions of long hallways filled with doors that opened to nothing. Whispers in the corner of their bedrooms. Cold hands brushing their backs as they slept. But the most disturbing detail? Each dream ended the same way. A knock at the window. Always 3 times. Even for those who lived miles away from Rosecliff. By early November, panic gripped the village. A family attempting to flee left their carriage in a ditch, horses dead from fright, mouths foaming. The wife was found holding their 2 children, eyes bloodshot, whispering one phrase again and again. The quiet house is awake. But still, no one dared demolish Rosecliff. It wasn't superstition. It was fear of something far deeper, the fear of acknowledgement. That to destroy the house might be to release what it contained. And yet, even as dread blanketed the region, a man named Thorn Eldwin arrived in Greymoor. A former cryptographer with ties to the Royal Society and the clandestine circle of Lothian, Eldwin claimed he had uncovered something encoded in Isabella Fairmont's writings. A pattern, not madness, but design. He spoke of a cipher embedded in her journal. Phrases repeating every 47 lines. Coordinates, dates, and one phrase underlined 13 times. She returns when the mirror breaks. Thorne's theory? Rosecliff wasn't cursed. It was built to contain something. A failsafe. And the structure beneath it, the quiet house, was not an accident. It was a mirror. And mirrors, by nature, were never meant to stay unbroken forever. Thorn Eldwin's obsession deepened quickly. What began as an academic pursuit turned into a full descent. Into the house, into the symbols, and eventually into himself. He set up residence at the Greymoor Inn and filled an entire attic room with chalk diagrams, maps, and torn-out pages from Isabella Fairmont's journal. He spoke rarely, slept less, and often walked the perimeter of Rosecliff Manor in the dead of night, muttering strings of Latin, Aramaic, and phonetic code under his breath. But it was the discovery on November 17th that changed everything. Inside a hollow stone wall behind the manor's chapel, Thorne uncovered a hidden reliquary, a lead box sealed with 7 iron nails. Its contents? One cracked mirror shard, a child's ring, and a slip of parchment with a single phrase written in Isabella's handwriting. The eye beneath remembers. Thorne interpreted this as a warning, or worse, an invitation. He returned to the manor that night. With no lantern, no gear, no witnesses. He was never seen again. But something else was. 2 nights later, a young farmhand named Elliot Harrow took it upon himself to search the manor grounds, desperate to prove Thorne's fate. What he found was not Thorne, but evidence that he had gone far beyond the physical walls of the house. The library doors were wide open. The chalk circle on the floor had been scuffed violently, and on the wall above the fireplace, etched deep into the stone, were 4 words. The key is hunger. Beneath it, in red ink, or perhaps something else, was the number 313 drawn over and over again in spirals. Elliot collapsed within the hour. He was found at dawn on the chapel steps, eyes wide open, whispering, "Her voice is made of mirrors," until his throat bled. Doctors sedated him and sent him to Blackmere Sanatorium. Within 6 days, he tore out his own tongue. He never spoke again. And still the manor stands. Windows dark, chimneys cold. But those who live in Greymoor say that if you stand by the gates at exactly 3:13 a.m., the wind changes. It doesn't howl. It breathes. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it whisper. She remembers you too. By early December, Greymoor was no longer just a haunted town. It had become a pressure point. A place where something ancient and unresolved kept pressing its weight into reality, begging to be noticed. Whispers spread that the land beneath Rosecliff wasn't originally part of Greymoor. That long before the village was ever established, this hilltop belonged to a nomadic order called the Valerites, a now-erased sect rumored to bury their dead upright, facing inward, toward a black stone called the Listening Eye. There were no official records, just fragments, charcoal rubbings, cracked pottery, etchings on bark recovered from nearby caves. All of them contained one repeated symbol, a woman with no face, her hands reaching through a mirror. Thorne Eldwin had hinted at this symbol in his notes, claiming the mirrors inside Rosecliff weren't ornamental. They were sentinels. Anchors. He theorized that Isabella Fairmont hadn't gone mad at all, but had merely glimpsed what the house was originally built to guard against. And the horrifying truth was this. Rosecliff was never meant to be lived in. It was a monument built over a fracture in the veil between this world and something deeper, colder, older. By mid-December, survivors, if you could call them that, began to report a new phenomenon. People didn't just dream of the house anymore. They dreamed of being inside it, and not as themselves, but as someone or something, watching from the walls, feeling every footstep on the floorboards, breathing through the cracks. A mail courier named Samuel Dorr vanished after reporting this exact dream 3 nights in a row. His final letter was postmarked but never delivered. Found in his abandoned mailbag, it read, "She walks at night now. Not through the halls. Through us." Church authorities attempted to seal the manor with iron chains and posted warnings along the perimeter. But every chain was found rusted through within 24 hours. Not broken, decayed, as if centuries had passed in a single night. The warning signs? Torn down by wind. No one saw who or what did it. But the final straw came on December 21st, the winter solstice. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip wandered too close to the property line. Only 9 returned, and all of them, every single one, spoke in unison when questioned. "We fed her now. She's waiting for the rest." December 22nd. Greymoor was silent. Shops closed. Windows boarded. Churches locked tight. No carolers. No bells. No lights. The town felt paused, like something had pressed a cold finger against its throat and told it to stay still. The 9 children were kept under watch at Blackmere Sanatorium, but something was wrong with the footage. Every night from 2:58 to 3:13 a.m., the security cameras froze, just static. When the feed returned, the children were no longer in their beds. They were always standing, always staring, facing the same empty corner of the room. That corner had once held a mirror. It had been removed years earlier. By Christmas Eve, the townspeople began to flee. But they didn't leave in cars or with suitcases. They walked, one by one, silently, into the woods that bordered Rosecliff's northern slope. Entire families, husbands without wives, grandfathers clutching children's shoes. None of them ever came back. And in the stillness of that night, Greymoor finally understood. The house wasn't haunted. It was hungry. The Rosecliff Journal's final article, dated December 24th, 1874, was written by a woman named Clara Miles, the paper's last editor. She stayed behind to document what was happening. Her words were simple. "We are offerings, wrapped in skin, tied with memory, left at her gate." Her body was never found, but the ink on her desk had been spilled into a perfect spiral. At the center of it, the number 313, and on the back of the last page was a child's handprint, dipped in blood, pressed gently against the words, "Don't knock. She's already inside." To this day, there are no formal records of a town named Greymoor in official Yorkshire archives. No mention of Rosecliff Manor in government registries. Not even a foundation stone. But if you search deep enough, if you pull the wrong thread in a forgotten archive, you'll find a single, redacted surveyor's note dated 1875. Region deemed unstable. Foundations lost to substructure collapse. Sound continue. Burial recommended. Whatever Rosecliff was, whatever it is, it was never meant to be found. But you found it. You're still here, still listening, still reading. And now she knows your name. On the evening of December 26th, the final recorded event took place. A coal delivery man named Elias Brandt, known for his punctuality and quiet nature, was scheduled to bring a final winter load to the town's orphanage. He never made it. Instead, at exactly 6:13 p.m., residents in the surrounding villages heard what they described as a low, continuous bell. Not a church bell, not a clock tower, something older, deeper, a tolling sound that felt like it came from the roots of the earth. That same night, a local cartographer named Isolde Crane returned to her family's estate outside of Greymoor with something strange in her hand, a map. One she claimed had unfolded itself inside her locked satchel. She didn't remember drawing it. The ink wasn't hers. The paper was centuries old, but on it, clearly marked, was the manor. Only now it wasn't called Rosecliff. It was labeled Mouth of the Bride. Where rooms should have been, there were teeth sketched in charcoal. Where stairwells should twist, there were vertebrae. The third floor was labeled Lungs, and the basement simply read, Womb. Do not enter. Isolde claimed she tried to burn it. The flames refused it. Water didn't smudge the ink. When she locked it in a box and buried it, the next morning it was on her kitchen table, dry, crisp, humming faintly. That was the same morning her daughter, Miriam, was found sleepwalking barefoot in the frost. Her nightgown shredded, eyes wide open, and a sentence etched into her arm in dried blood. The house has no door, only skin. No signs of struggle, no tracks in the snow, just that horrible quiet. Word of these final events never made it to the broader public, not through any act of suppression, but because those who heard simply chose not to speak, as if uttering the name Rosecliff summoned something that might finally turn its attention their way. But the map was real. It made its way into private collections, reappearing in occult circles and underground auctions. Some claim to have it. Others claim it cannot be possessed, only followed. And if the coordinates are correct, then the house didn't disappear. It's still there, waiting, sleeping beneath dead leaves and rotted beams, listening through the soil, waiting for someone like you to ask the wrong question. To read too far, they say the house breathes. Not metaphorically, not as a symbol, but literally. Survivors, though that word is generous, have described a low pulsing hum, rhythmic like the slow, muffled inhale and exhale of a great creature sleeping beneath the boards. In 1987, a paranormal investigator named Dr. Alaric Dane led a team into what they believed to be the overgrown remains of Rosecliff Manor. The footage was buried for decades, but portions have leaked through underground forums, always grainy, always abruptly ending. In one clip, a team member, only referred to as Mads, whispers, "There are no windows inside, only portraits, and they're all of us." Dr. Dane was found wandering 5 miles from the site, barefoot and speaking in a language no one recognized, his tongue nearly bitten in half. The rest of his team? Gone. Every instrument meant to detect EMF, radiation, or temperature collapsed at the threshold. Batteries bled dry. Compasses spun. But the most disturbing find? A fragment of audio, recovered from a crushed recorder embedded in tree roots, captured something unmistakably human. A lullaby. Soft. Feminine. The lyrics, when translated from Old Church Slavonic, said, "Hush now, sweet marrow. Sleep in the bone. The bride shall rise when you're alone." Several folklore scholars have connected this to an obscure European entity known as the Hollow Bride, a spirit said to consume entire bloodlines, houses, and names until history forgets they ever existed. But in one account, a monk from 1432 describes a black manor of ribs appearing in the woods after a village's sins went unspoken. It was not built. It grew. Now pause. Look around you. Are you alone? Because this is the part in every tale where the reader becomes the vessel. The moment the story is no longer just a story, but a route. If you're still here, I want you to comment the words. "I remember the humming." Type it once. Then type it again. That's how we'll know you've gone deep enough. That you heard her breathing too. Now brace yourself. 3 weeks after the last Rosecliff sighting, a letter was found in the hollow trunk of an elm tree 12 miles east of Greymoor. It was addressed only to the one who follows. The paper was creased, aged, damp, but legible. The ink had not faded. If anything, it seemed darker than blood. It read, "You cannot save them. They fed the house, and now the house feeds. But she waits for the one who walks backward. She waits for the one who bleeds memory. If that is you, do not enter the cellar." Beneath the letter was a torn strip of cloth, dark velvet, with a symbol stitched in white thread, a circle of teeth surrounding a single eye. The same symbol would appear again in 2004, spray-painted onto the wall of a condemned asylum in northern Maine, and again in 2017, carved into the underside of a pew in an abandoned chapel in Estonia. It always appears where silence festers, where memory rots, where something was fed. Meanwhile, the manor's property continued to distort natural law. Animals born nearby showed signs of rapid aging. Calves with grayed teeth, birds molting within hours of hatching. A botanist sent in to collect samples of the soil brought back moss that glowed faintly in the dark and continued to grow even when dried and pressed between glass. In a private interview, he confessed, "It's not decay, it's gestation. Something is coming to term beneath it all." And there was something else. The bells. At precisely 3:03 a.m., those who lived within a 20-mile radius of the ruins reported hearing it. A third tone, no bell in the town, matched its sound. It didn't echo. It vibrated. Some claimed it shook their bones. Others said it made them dream of a woman, tall, faceless, in a gown made of curtains and skin, beckoning them toward a door that had no hinges. But the most common report? People woke up with dirt beneath their fingernails and splinters in their feet, as if they'd been walking barefoot deep in the walls. And every single one of them claimed the same thing. They could feel her watching, from beneath, from the dark place where houses grow instead of crumble. If you're still with us, you've gone farther than most. The original blueprints of Rosecliff Manor were never recovered. But in 1923, a draftsman named Hector Varn located what he believed to be a facsimile, a mirrored version, stored inside a sealed cathedral vault in Liechtenstein. It was wrapped in human skin. Varn opened the vault at 9:11 p.m. By 9:37, he had gouged out his own eyes with a set of compass needles and carved the words, "It was built inside me first," across the plaster wall of his study. He died before explaining what that meant. But what followed was even stranger. An autopsy revealed 3 miniature staircases lodged inside his lungs. One spiraled down, one spiraled up, one led nowhere. The medical report was sealed, and the cathedral quietly condemned 6 months later due to structural instability. But those who enter before demolition say the walls were pulsing, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but moving like breathing skin. On the 4th floor, etched into a brass plate beneath a shattered crucifix, were the words, "She loved them once," until they spoke her name. That's when historians began to ask a chilling question. What if Rosecliff Manor didn't collapse or decay? What if it shed, like a husk, a chrysalis? And what now slumbers beneath Briarhelm is not a ruin, but a second form, a perfected body, a reformation of hatred into architecture, a place that doesn't just remember pain, but requires it. Folklorists call this type of structure a resonant habitation, a home that forms around intense emotion the way coral forms around bone. And this one, it's singing, frequencies embedded in rock, coated through with grain and dust. One frequency for each child, one frequency for each sin. And if you stand still long enough near the outer boundary, just long enough, you can feel your name beginning to fade. Letters unwinding, memories slipping through cracks that were never there before. Which is why, if you're still watching, you must not stop now. If you stop now, she'll know you were afraid. And she loves fear. His name was Elia. Found in 1876, nearly 2 years after the final known incident at Rosecliff Manor, Elia was discovered naked and crawling through a peat bog 5 miles east of Briarhelm. He was 11 years old, yet his teeth were fully adult. His eyes, gray and glassy, blinked out of sync. A farmer spotted him crouched beneath a willow tree, chewing the bark. When approached, Elia spoke a single phrase, over and over. I waited, but the door turned inside out. Authorities assumed he was feral, a lost boy, traumatized by isolation. But there was a problem. There were no missing children reports matching his description in the region or the country. His fingerprints had no match, and his blood was not entirely human. Traces of chlorophyll were found in his tissue, as well as what appeared to be spore clusters embedded along his spine, clusters that moved when exposed to heat. The doctor who examined him lasted only 6 days before resigning, citing unresolvable dread. Before he left, he confided to a nurse, "That boy isn't a survivor. He's a messenger." Elia never slept. He never ate anything other than dirt, roots, and old pages torn from hymnals. And on the night of October 1st, 1876, he vanished from his locked hospital room. The only trace he left was a spiral, drawn in his own blood, on the ceiling. 6 years later, an identical spiral was found carved beneath the tongue of a girl who had never spoken a word in her life, until she walked past the ruins of Rosecliff. She screamed only once. Mother's awake. Then silence. Institutionalized for life. That same spiral, always counterclockwise, began to appear all over Briarhelm. Carved in a tree bark, scrawled behind mirrors, burned into the underside of church pews. People started calling it the Mother Mark. And its meaning? Only one thing. Something made it out. If you're still with us, type "the spiral is the key" in the comments. Twice. We need to know who's listening. The townspeople of Briarhelm call it the voice beneath. They don't say it often. In fact, most don't say it at all. But those who do whisper it like a curse. It started in 1882, 8 years after Elia vanished. A parish bell began ringing on its own at 3:17 a.m. every Sunday, even though the rope had been removed and the bell tower boarded shut. Locals began reporting a deep, thrumming tone vibrating through the earth beneath their homes. At first, it was barely perceptible, like a hum in the teeth. But over time, it grew more distinct. It began mimicking voices. One widow heard her dead husband whispering her name from beneath the floorboards. A schoolteacher said she heard her students reciting lessons they'd never been taught. One mother, already driven half-mad by grief, was lured into the cellar by the voice of her stillborn daughter. She never came back up. Her body was never found. Only a note, written in perfect cursive across the coal-dusted wall. We are the mouth now. Folklorists call this kind of entity a subterranean echo, but there's no precedent for what was discovered next. A former miner, desperate to prove what he'd heard, began digging directly beneath the old church foundations. He lasted 3 nights. Then he surfaced, smiling, bleeding from the ears, speaking in Latin, a language he never learned. He said, "She wears the house. She sings in wood. She made us kneel inside the walls." Then he bit off his own tongue. The mine was sealed, but not before he carved one final phrase into the handle of his pickaxe. "There is no ground, only skin." From that moment forward, the townspeople began moving out. Quietly, in the night, whole families gone without a sound. By 1885, Briarhelm was nearly empty. But some couldn't leave. Some were called to stay. They said the house beneath the town had grown roots, and once you heard its song, it never let go. His name was Solomon Gray. A failed architect turned occult draftsman, Solomon was commissioned in 1859 to design the lower chambers of Rosecliff Manor. But when officials later reviewed the blueprints, they found something deeply wrong. There were no staircases, no access routes, no doors, just an endless repetition of overlapping rooms, winding halls, and walls that formed impossible angles. Some corridors connected back to themselves. Others led nowhere, ending in jagged lines labeled with only one word: listening. Solomon Gray had no known apprentices, no firm, and no residence. He vanished shortly after delivering the final set of drawings, wrapped in children's burial linens. But in 1886, nearly 30 years later, a letter was discovered behind the altar of Street Valores Chapel, addressed simply, "To whoever survives the blueprint." Inside was a confession that read more like prophecy than madness. "I did not draw those rooms," Gray wrote. "I dreamed them. Every night for 44 days. My hands moved, but they weren't mine. My bones hummed as I etched her design. The house spoke to me, not with words but with thirst." Gray's final paragraph was scrawled in a trembled, erratic hand. "She is not in the walls. She is the walls. Her name is not spoken. Her body is architecture." Experts dismissed the letter as the ravings of a lunatic. But in 1891, a team of structural historians rediscovered the foundations beneath Rosecliff, and what they found matched Gray's impossible blueprints exactly, down to the last crooked hall. No one could explain it. There were chambers where no excavation had been done, walls where there should have been dirt, and inscriptions, hundreds of them, etched into the stone in a language predating Latin, Greek, even Sumerian. One recurring symbol appeared again and again, a spiral piercing through a triangle made of bones. That same symbol was found branded onto the back of Elior's neck when he was discovered. It wasn't architecture. It was anatomy. The house had grown around something, and that something was waiting. The journal was found buried behind the hearth of Rosecliff Manor in 1903. Its leather cover was scorched, its pages water-warped, but the ink, somehow, remained untouched. It belonged to Isaac Marrow, the manor's final caretaker. In his first entry, dated March 5, 1873, he describes his arrival to Briarhelm as a desperate man. He'd lost his wife to a drowning, his son to fever. With nothing left, he took the position no one else would take, keeper of a manor that locals feared more than they feared the gallows. But Isaac was a man of logic, until he opened the basement. His third journal entry reads, "I unbarred the latch at dusk. A second door waited. No hinges, no seams, but it opened when I breathed near it, and inside was not a room." What followed was a cascade of hallucinations, dreams that bled into waking hours, screams from inside the walls, the scent of milk turning sour in sealed containers, dozens of spiders nesting in his own ears without any sign of entry. Isaac began writing at night, unable to stop, but he also began going blind. Every page became darker, ink grew thicker, until he claimed he could no longer see at all, but still he wrote perfectly in straight lines, as if the words guided his hand. The journal soon abandoned dates altogether. Instead, entries were marked by cryptic phrases. "The wall breathes. Midnight beneath flesh. She is drawing me backward." But the final entry is what broke the researchers who found it. It reads, "Her ribs are the stairs. Her teeth, the doors. I swallowed her voice, and it hollowed me. You cannot escape a home that remembers your name. I was never the caretaker. I was always the floor. The journal ends there. Two of the researchers quit their careers within days. One was committed to an asylum after claiming the writing was still being updated, even in sealed vaults. To this day, no one has been able to replicate the ink Isaac used. Because it wasn't ink. It was liquefied bone marrow, traced with human salt. The decision to burn Rosecliff Manor was not made lightly. By 1912, Briarhelm had become a ghost of itself, 29 disappearances in a single year. For search parties never returned. Infants were being born without fingerprints. And in the northern quarter, birds no longer flew. A town council meeting was called on October 4th. 7 men entered that hall. Only 6 came out. The chair at the end of the table, where Councilman Harridan always sat, was found empty. But his shoes remained upright, side by side, still laced tight, as if he'd vanished straight out of them. And on the wood where he'd rested his hands, the grain had blackened. The vote to burn the house passed unanimously. But as the torches were prepared, a boy no one recognized stepped into the path of the workers. He looked 12, maybe 13, pale, silent. His clothes were too clean for the muddy streets. His eyes were fogged over like marble glass. He raised one hand and whispered, "She is not asleep." Then, without warning, every candle in town extinguished. The boy dropped to the ground and began to scream, not in words, but in dialed tones, frequencies no human voice should make. Dogs howled. Windows shattered. Several men collapsed, bleeding from the nose and ears. When they recovered, the boy was gone. But the message was received. The torches were dropped. The fire was never lit. Instead, the council ordered the manor buried. They hired men from distant towns, sworn to secrecy, to collapse the earth around the estate and entomb it beneath layers of stone and salt. They even rerouted a river to flood the surrounding soil, creating what is now known as the Hollow Basin. The records of the event were sealed, but not before one final entry was made in the town archive ledger. Let be known, Rosecliff is not a structure. It is a sentence. We're not demolishing a house. We are defying a god. They thought they could bury her. They thought wrong. Because the manor still breathes beneath Briarhelm. In 1923, exactly 50 years after the triplets vanished, a covert order formed in Briarhelm under the name the Pale Vigil. They claimed no religious affiliation, no political ties, only one purpose: to ensure nothing ever rose again from beneath Rosecliff Manor. Made up of ex-miners, disavowed priests, and at least one known medium, the Pale Vigil met once a month near the edge of the Hollow Basin. They would lower brass rods into the flooded ground and listen, not for sound but for vibrations. One of their founding rules was never to speak directly about what was heard, only to draw it. And those drawings were stored in locked copper tubes, later found decades later in the attic of a crumbling watchtower. Inside them, shapes no man could name, spirals that moved the longer you stared, geometry that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space. One sketch appeared to show the interior of the manor, only it was built from vertebrae, threaded with hair, and lit by thousands of unblinking, lidless eyes. But in 1956, a girl named Lydia Venn returned to Briarhelm with sketches that made even the Pale Vigil recoil. She had been missing for 8 months. Her parents were told she'd fallen into the Hollow Basin and drowned. But one morning, she reappeared in the middle of town, barefoot, her nightgown dry, her fingernails bitten down to the bone. She wouldn't speak, but she would draw. In a single week, she filled over 200 pages, each one more detailed than the last. The same room appeared over and over. A nursery, with 3 identical cribs. In each drawing, the walls were different, sometimes made of wood, sometimes of muscle, sometimes of stretched-out human faces stitched together. But the triplets were always there, smiling, and behind them, a mirror that showed something else watching the artist draw them. Experts examined her work. No one could explain how she managed such anatomical precision at 7 years old. Then came her final drawing. She scribbled out all 3 children, and in their place, drew herself. Beneath it, a single line in red pencil. She said, "I was the 4th." In the spring of 1974, the Hollow Basin experienced an unprecedented drought. For the first time in over a century, the mud receded enough to expose the remnants of a stone arch, something not recorded on any town survey, map, or a geological file. It wasn't natural. It was crafted. A team of 4 geological surveyors was sent to examine the formation. Among them was Dr. Glenn Ivers, a hydrologist with no connection to Briarhelm's past. That made him the ideal candidate, or so they thought. What they found was not a wall, not a ruin, not a collapsed well. It was a door, 10 feet tall, circular, covered in etchings no one could translate. There was no visible handle, no hinges, no seams. But when one of the surveyors, Randy Hark, placed his hand on the center of the door, it responded. It pulsed. Under his palm, the stone grew warm, then hot. Randy began to laugh. Not the laugh of amusement, but the kind of laughter you hear from a man who's losing his place in reality. He collapsed. When the others tried to move him, they found his hand fused to the door. The skin had stretched, the bones bending. His arm was being pulled inside the stone. Dr. Ivers severed the limb with a hatchet to save Randy's life. They carried him back to town, but he was never the same. He spoke in a voice that wasn't his, lower, with a delay, like something beneath water trying to echo through his lungs. And all he would say was, "It's not a door, it's a lung, and it's inhaling." The town tried to cover it up. The stone arch was reburied under layers of iron and cement. But weeks later, a group of spelunkers, unauthorized, descended into the hollow at night. They were never seen again, except for one photo, found in a disposable camera that washed up 4 miles downstream. It showed 3 figures in a tunnel of black stone, illuminated by flashlight. And just visible at the end of the corridor, a nursery mobile made of teeth. By autumn of 1975, Briarhelm was no longer just a curiosity. It had become a liability. Too many missing. Too many reports of things not seen but felt. Low droning at night. Children speaking in unfamiliar dialects. And that door, sealed and buried, was still being found in dreams by people who had never even been there. Then came the declaration. The U.S. Department of Environmental Protection, in collaboration with the Bureau of Land Management, classified Briarhelm and its surrounding 5-mile radius as a closed ecological zone. The public explanation? Toxic groundwater, unstable geology, a mine collapsed too deep for safe surveying. The real reason? A leaked memo from within the Department of Energy revealed something far worse. Irregular magnetic distortions, coronal dislocation patterns, and disobedient biological growth within the restricted perimeter. Disobedient biological growth. What could that even mean? The memo mentioned entity echoes, a term found only in experimental research files tied to Cold War psychic operations. The language was clinical, almost sterile, but the implication was clear. Something was alive down there, and it didn't follow natural law. They brought in personnel, not soldiers, not scientists, handlers, men in gray uniforms without insignias. They arrived in black trucks with no plates. No one spoke to them. Their first act? Build the perimeter cage. Barbed wire, concrete, steel pylons etched with sigils. Not government symbols, protective symbols, drawn from at least 7 different mythological systems. No one was allowed in, not even locals. And anyone who tried to film or investigate was met with armed resistance. Then, just as quickly as they had come, the teams disappeared. Except for one handler, found in the woods just outside the boundary. His tongue had been removed, his wrist slit, but carved into his chest in deep block lettering was a final message. Do not listen to their laughter. Within weeks, every reference to Briarhelm was wiped from public records. Maps replaced the town with forestry. Historical registries refiled the triplet case as apocryphal. But if that were true, if it really were apocryphal, why did survivors from the surrounding counties start receiving anonymous packages, each containing 3 old photographs, all the same room, and in every one, the triplets had aged? In December of 1976, just 18 months after Briarhelm was sealed off, a quiet farming town named Winslow, 40 miles east, made a 911 call that no operator could forget. The caller was Margaret Holloway, a new mother. Her voice was frantic, barely coherent. She kept repeating, "She's not alone in the crib. They're inside her. They're inside her." When responders arrived, the child, 8-month-old Gracie, was in perfect health. No injuries, no signs of intrusion, no evidence of trauma. Except for one thing. Every single mirror in the house had shattered. No forced entry, no seismic activity, just fractures that started from the exact spot in every reflection that would have captured Gracie's eyes. Margaret was hospitalized, but the nurses who monitored Gracie began reporting anomalies. Not physical, auditory. They heard her babble and giggle, but not like an infant. They said it sounded like 3 overlapping voices, low, dry, and synchronized. One nurse, who had formerly worked in pediatric psychiatry, said, "It sounds like men trapped in a well, laughing at their own funeral." Doctors chalked it up to stress, hallucination, mass suggestion, until Gracie started responding to names no one had spoken aloud. She would look toward the hallway when someone whispered Ruth. She would cry when the name Elias was mentioned. She would laugh every single time when anyone said the name Thorne. 3 names, 3 brothers, 3 entities, or 3 parts of one thing. A week later, Gracie disappeared from her crib. No broken windows, no unlocked doors, only a small handprint on the wall, far too high for any infant to reach. And beneath it, scratched into the drywall with something not human. She was too hollow to keep us in. The town never recovered. Margaret Holloway was found hanging in her cell 2 months later. Her suicide note was just 1 sentence long. "They don't grow, they remember." By early 1977, under the cover of a false infrastructure initiative, a classified excavation team returned to Briar Helm, this time focusing beneath the old schoolhouse. The building had long since collapsed, but rumors persisted that it had once been the site of a sealed substructure, something not listed on any architectural plans. What they found was not a basement. It was a chamber, circular, carved from black shale, 30 feet below the surface. And at the center, a monolith, 8 feet tall, bone white, and covered in symbols that predate recorded history. The walls were lined with shelves. Each shelf held small skeletal remains. Dozens, possibly hundreds. But these weren't ordinary bones. The femurs were too long. The jaw structures too wide. The skulls? Some had 3 eye sockets. The team brought in a forensic anthropologist under the promise of secrecy. After 3 days, she walked out wordless. On the 4th day, her report arrived. It contained no conclusions, just one question, written in red ink. Why do they have birth notches carved into their bones? It wasn't the question that disturbed the agency. It was the fact that the same notches, in triplicate, appeared on the inside of the monolith, as if they'd been tallied. And beneath that stone slab, an ossuary, packed with bones so old that their marrow had crystallized into red dust. Yet when opened, the chamber exhaled warm breath, moist, thick, and smelling of copper and burnt rosemary. There were no insects, no rot, no decay, just silence, until the sound started again, just like in the original tapes. Laughter. Only this time, it wasn't coming from speakers or tape loops. It was coming from inside the observers' heads. The head of the excavation went blind within 24 hours. 2 others were institutionalized. One disappeared on his flight back to Virginia. No wreckage, no trace. The site was declared permanently hazardous and resealed. They poured concrete over the entire valley, declared it a restricted wildlife zone. But concrete does not silence memory, and it does not silence what waits beneath. It was the winter of 1979 when a retired Navy radio technician named Eugene Mallory picked up a frequency he was never meant to hear. Mallory lived just 12 miles from the former Briarhelm perimeter. Alone, remote, quiet. His hobby was scanning long-wave frequencies for forgotten broadcasts and military artifacts. But that night, at 3:03 a.m., his receiver caught a pulse. Not static, a heartbeat. Then a voice. 3 of them, layered over each other like slow tectonic plates grinding. Not in English, not in any modern dialect. Mallory, stunned by the tone, recorded a 5-minute segment. The words were impossible to transcribe, harsh, ancient, inhuman. But linguists from 3 universities, who later reviewed the audio, agreed on one impossible thing. It was a proto-language, one that predated Sumerian. The closest human equivalent was a dialect spoken by a tribe that disappeared in 400 BC, deep in the Zagros Mountains. And the translation? Rough, fragmented, but parts of it emerged. We were born in threes. We dream in one. The mother split. The vessel cracked. We were poured out. They buried our mouths, but forgot the sound. After this, Mallory's broadcast system shorted out completely. Fried circuits, melted copper. His backup analog rig, never plugged into the main, was also corrupted. The room smelled like burnt blood and wet stone. Mallory went silent for weeks. When 2 paranormal researchers visited him, they found the walls of his cabin covered in hundreds of hand-drawn eyes, each one slightly open, each with 3 pupils. In the center of the floor was a spiral of old radio wire, and inside it, Mallory sat cross-legged, murmuring in that same ancient tongue. He never spoke English again. And when they played the original 5-minute recording back on public air, the frequency fried 3 different stations, all 3 receiving unexplained surges through shielded wires. The FCC buried the incident, but a bootleg copy made it online in 2003. Every person who reported listening to it alone with headphones claimed the same thing. It felt like something climbed into me and smiled. And all their timestamps? 3:03 a.m. Exactly the same moment the original signal was caught. In 1982, under a veil of absolute silence, the Vatican dispatched an unmarked envoy to the outskirts of Briarhelm. No fanfare, no official record, just a black car, an untraceable jet, and a single man. Father Alfio Strigari, a Jesuit exorcist once tasked with overseeing forbidden archives beneath the Basilica of San Clemente, archives the church had sealed off since the 1600s. He arrived with a lead box, gloves, and an assistant who never once spoke. Within 48 hours of arrival, the assistant vanished. Local hunters later found his clothing, folded neatly near the mouth of a dried riverbed. But his body was never recovered. Only his tongue, nailed to a nearby tree with a silver pin etched with the Latin phrase, Custodes non loquuntur. The watchers do not speak. What Father Strigari encountered beneath the concrete shell of Briarhelm is still debated. But one thing is not. He returned with something sealed in a reliquary. Metallic, rust-colored, marked with a single sigil resembling 3 interlocked serpents forming a spiral. And on the side, in soot-dark ink, in sanguinitato, non humanum. The blood is changed, not human. Strigari delivered the object directly to the Vatican's Department of Obscured Phenomena, a secretive division even most clergy have never heard of. The contents of the reliquary were never disclosed. But 6 months later, Father Strigari was found in his private quarters, face down in a basin of holy water, boiled from within. The room untouched. No fire, no heat source, just him and the reliquary now empty. They sealed his quarters with molten wax. And in the decades that followed, 33 priests involved with the case either vanished or died in confounding ways, some struck blind, others mad. One found whispering about the Trinity beneath the cradle. As for the reliquary, it was tracked once more to a monastery in northern Greenland, a place where the sun doesn't rise for months and the wind sounds like breathing. Inside, monks had carved the same symbol over and over. 3 serpents in a spiral, etched into ice, stone, bone, and even their own skin. When asked who taught them this, the head monk replied only. The triplets visited, and they spoke of the Hollow Mother. It was a backwoods town in Arkansas. Summer of 1999. Oppressive heat. Tornado season. And in the dying days of July, a 7-year-old girl named Clara Winslow vanished for 12 hours. She was last seen playing near the edge of the Winslow family farm, close to an old well that had been filled in decades earlier after 3 horses refused to go near it. Search parties scoured the property, drones, dogs, helicopters. Nothing. Then, as suddenly as she'd gone, Clara reappeared. Barefoot, mud-caked, her dress torn down the middle. No fear in her eyes, just a strange calm, and a voice that seemed older than a child should carry. When her mother asked where she had been, Clara smiled and said, "With the pale ones. They taught me how to hum the sky open." Doctors examined her. No wounds, no signs of trauma. But she wouldn't speak again, except at 3:03 a.m. each night, when she'd wake and begin reciting a low, rhythmic chant. Linguists were brought in. The chant was recorded, analyzed, compared, and what they discovered was chilling. The language Clara spoke was a dead dialect, pre-Indo-European, a tongue not heard aloud in over 7,000 years. Not taught, not learned, extinct, but her syntax was flawless. Even more disturbing, every night, just before the chant began, her eyes would roll back, and her voice would split into 3 tones. One high, one low, one barely audible. 3 voices, perfectly synchronized. Her parents, gripped by fear, tried to record the phenomenon, but every tape, every digital file, returned blank. Not static, just silence. Until one night, a psychiatrist monitoring Clara fell unconscious during the session. He later reported hearing laughter behind his eyes, and when he awoke, the word matriarch was scratched into his forearm from the inside out, as if the skin had burst open to reveal it. After that, Clara was removed from the public eye, relocated, changed identities, her family erased from local records. But every year since, on July 27th at exactly 3:03 a.m., an anonymous recording circulates online, a looped whisper of her original chant. And those who've listened closely say that, behind Clara's voice, there are 2 others, whispering in unison. One body, 3 minds. We return. When investigators cleared the final rubble for Briarhelm's eastern crypt, they found a sealed cavity, 6 feet beneath the foundation. No air vents. No structural reason it should have existed. Inside it, a single journal, wrapped in black cloth, perfectly preserved despite the rot around it. The pages were brittle, water-stained, but the ink, still fresh. The journal's entries began in 1874, written in neat, obsessively controlled handwriting by someone identifying themselves as Margaret W. Mardane, though no such name appeared in any census, church record, or township registry. The entries began as daily observations of her 3 children, whom she referred to only as the siblings. Not my daughters, not the triplets, just the siblings. She describes their behavior as unervingly aligned, with exact sleeping patterns, simultaneous eye movements, and the tendency to speak sentences in perfect relay, each one finishing where the other left off, without error. But as the entries continue, Margaret's tone shifts. She becomes obsessed with the idea that the siblings were never born, but instead descended into flesh through me. She claims to have dreamt of them years before conception. 3 beings wrapped in black cords, speaking a language that cracked the moon. Then come the drawings. Page after page of the serpent spiral, always in sets of 3. But one set in particular, drawn on the center spread, showed the spiral opening. Inside it, a crude depiction of a woman without a face, standing in a field of writhing infants, each with black holes for eyes. Margaret's final entry is the most disturbing. Dated October 31st, 1874, it simply reads, "They're no longer mine. The house answers to them now. They walk without sound. They speak through the wood. And when I awoke, my blood spelled their names." Beneath the passage, written in what appears to be dried blood, are 3 names. Names never found in any record, mythology, or known language. Thesa, Oruan, Mirith. Experts in ancient linguistics found one reference, just one, buried in a 12th century occult text from Spain. A passage that translates to, "When the gate breaks and the mother splits, these 3 shall wear flesh once more. One to whisper, one to watch, one to wound." The journal now sits in a locked vault, but the wood of its cover continues to pulse faintly, as if breathing. In 2022, Deep in the frostbitten outskirts of Siglafjord, Iceland, a woman named Solveig and his daughter gave birth to 3 girls, triplets, with no known father. No medical record of insemination. No sign of male DNA in any test. The conception itself was labeled biologically inexplicable. Each child was born with a perfectly symmetrical spiral mark on their upper back. 3 concentric rings that seemed to darken when exposed to cold. Local midwives whispered of the old tales, ones even the churches wouldn't speak aloud. Solveig claimed she had never been with a man. She said she began having dreams months before the pregnancy. Dreams of a field of black-eyed infants singing to her beneath the northern lights. Authorities dismissed the case. Scientists called it a mutation. But within days of the triplets' birth, disturbing phenomena began to plague the remote village. Cattle were found dead, tongues and eyes missing, yet with no visible wounds. Children spoke of 3 little girls who visited them at night and whispered secrets only the dead should know. One elderly priest attempted to bless the family's home, but collapsed the moment he crossed the threshold. Witnesses said he screamed that the flesh was wearing them wrong. The local government issued a quiet relocation order. Solveig and the girls vanished from public view. Their property was purchased by a private organization based in Switzerland, one with deep connections to forbidden genetic research. But then came the audio files. A whistleblower leaked 3 recordings, allegedly captured by researchers monitoring the children. Each file featured a distinct voice, speaking in a spiraling tongue, the same language that had once flowed from the mouth of Clara Winslow in 1999. Linguists verified it was the same dialect, a dead pre-human structure, nearly identical to the one found in the 1874 Brierhelm Journal. Even more alarming, when layered atop each other, the 3 voices aligned to form a tritone harmonic pulse. Listeners reported nausea, blackouts. Some even claimed to see images, a faceless woman, the sound of infants crying in reverse, and a burning tree with 33 roots. Solveig's final communication to the outside world was a handwritten note delivered anonymously to a local chapel. It read, "They're not here to live. They're here to open." The paper was folded into a triangle. Inside was a drawing, 3 spiral marks, each surrounded by faint symbols matching the Vexley sigil once carved into the Brierhelm basement. Every 33 years, somewhere in the world, a triple birth has been recorded, always under strange or traumatic circumstances. And in every case, only 1 child survived. 1920, Belarus. 1953, Chile. 1986, Morocco. Each event shares 3 traits. The mother reports shadowy dreams before conception. The children are born with unusual markings on their skin, often spirals, glyphs, or serpentine curves. And within months, 2 of the infants die under inexplicable conditions. No disease, no trauma, just stillness. Governments never link these cases. But off-the-record correspondences between certain private research circles, those tracing forbidden bloodlines and psychic anomalies, reveal a growing theory that these births are not random, but ritual. In every 33-year cycle, the triple birth is seen as a vessel testing, a flesh-seeking event tied to ancient entities that require human hosts, but never fully integrate. 2 of the children are believed to fail the merger. One continues. But in 2022, for the first time in recorded history, all 3 survived. The Icelandic triplets have remained hidden since their relocation, but aerial footage and insider reports suggest they now reside in a repurposed Cold War facility, a subterranean base beneath the Norwegian border, owned by a defunct pharmaceutical company with ties to Erlim Cultra experimentation. What's worse, during a blackout in March 2024, a perimeter guard reported hearing 3 voices humming in perfect harmony, despite being alone at the gate. The humming caused his nose to bleed. He was found unconscious. His body temp had dropped to 27 degrees Celsius, but he was not dead. He kept muttering 3 words before being sedated. They've passed through. Back in Brierhelm, the town council, once obsessed with hiding the 1874 Mardane records, has quietly disbanded. Their files, once housed in the local archives, were stolen. A fire destroyed the building days later. But 2 pages survived. One page, a map showing 3 hidden chambers beneath the original manor, previously sealed off. The other, a line of text. We failed to stop them. The gate has been pierced. They have skin now. The handwriting matched Margaret Mardane's 1874 journal. But the ink had not aged. They were never supposed to survive. The triplets of 1874. The voices of 1999. The faceless whisperer in the Vexley catacombs. The spirals that return every 33 years. None of it was coincidence. It was a design, so precise, so patient, that even the most advanced institutions couldn't comprehend it. A hidden algorithm of flesh and time, spiraling through generations, camouflaged by tragedy, buried in archives, and encrypted into bloodlines. And now, the final rotation is complete. In a declassified memo leaked just weeks ago, it's revealed that the Icelandic facility housing the triplets experienced a full systems failure at 3:33 a.m. on June 6, 2025. All cameras went dark. Internal doors unlocked. Gas-fed containment chambers failed. When military investigators arrived 6 hours later, the compound was silent. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just 3 things. A child's drawing on the wall, 3 black spirals overlapping into a perfect triangle. A single sentence carved into the command center table. They're learning to walk as one. An open journal page, dated back to 1874. But the ink was still wet. Since then, satellite data has recorded auroral distortions in the upper atmosphere, specifically near abandoned Cold War sites, shuttered convents, and former Vexley estate locations. In each place, animals flee. Electronics fail, and radios pick up a voice, young, feminine, layered 3 times over, whispering in a language that doesn't belong on Earth. And when you slow it down, when you reverse the frequencies, one phrase emerges again and again. We have opened the gate. The Vexley spiral is no longer just a symbol. It is a mechanism, activated by trauma, perfected by time, and embedded into the minds of children born under silence and secrecy. What was once myth now breathes. You've been watching DeadScroll, where darkness isn't told, unfolds. If you made it this far, comment below. The spiral opens. Say it twice, because once you see the pattern, you're already part of it. Subscribe before they silence the story. And remember, some mysteries were never meant to be solved.